Hey everybody, Tim Albrecht here, and thank you for listening to the YFP podcast, where each week we strive to inspire and encourage you on your path towards achieving financial freedom. This week, our resident home buying expert, Nate Hedrick, joins the show to answer the question, how much house can I afford? We discuss how to avoid the trap of becoming house poor, the ever lively debate of renting versus buying, and what costs to consider beyond the down payment and monthly payment, which includes principal, interest, taxes, and insurance. Whether you're a first-time home buyer or already own your own home, our hope is this episode will help you evaluate how home ownership fits as one puzzle piece in the rest of the financial plan. Speaking of home buying, Nate will be joining us for a free webinar coming up on Thursday, April 25th at 8:30 p.m. Eastern, titled Your Checklist for Buying a Home in 2024. During this webinar, Nate will share what you need to know about purchasing a home in 2024, and will walk you through important steps to take in your home buying journey to make the process easier to navigate and understand. You can sign up for this webinar by visiting yourfinancialpharmacist.com/home buying 2024. Again, that's yourfinancialpharmacist.com/home buying 2024. All right, let's hear from today's sponsor, the Real Estate RPH, and then we'll jump into the show. Are you planning to buy a home in the next year or two? With the state of current home prices and mortgage rates, the home buying process can feel overwhelming. But what if you could leverage the knowledge and ongoing support of someone who has worked with dozens of other pharmacists through their home buying journey, all at no cost to you? I'm talking about Nate Hedrick at the Real Estate RPH. Nate is a pharmacist who has been a partner of YFP for many years now and offers a home buying concierge service that can help you find a high quality agent in your area and support you throughout the entire process. So head on over to realestaterph.com or click on the link in the show notes to schedule your free 30-minute jumpstart planning session with Nate. Nate, welcome back to the show.
Hey, Tim, always good to be here.
Well, this is the time of year where things start to really heat up on the home buying, the home selling side of things. Although, we're continue to be in this unique cycle that is a little bit of an out of whack of supply and demand. We've got obviously interest rates still where they're at. So as you go into this spring season, what's normal, what's not normal for you this time of year?
I guess the only normal thing is that it is getting busy. My schedule is quite busy right now with the spring, with a lot of buyers, a lot of sellers, which is great. I mean, it's great for my business, but it's still a bit of a weird time, right? We've got interest rates in kind of a weird spot. Still have a lot of low inventory out there, so people that are trying to find the right home, it's more difficult. And then we've got things going on with the industry in general that are just making it a bit of a weird market right now.
Absolutely. And before we get too deep into the topic, Nate, for any of our listeners that are, in the moment, looking to buy a home, looking to sell a home, wanting to make sure that they get out in front of this, or maybe even for those that are listening and saying, hey, this is a 3-month thing, a 6-month thing. You and I both know how that goes.
Mm-hmm.
Things can move quickly. We want to make sure they get connected to you and your services, what you offer through the Real Estate RPH concierge service. They can do that by going to yourfinancialpharmacist.com. We'll talk more about this as we go throughout the episode at the end as well. Click on home buying, and from there, you'll see an option to find an agent, get connected with Nate, and be on your way for this big decision. Certainly that it is. And we want to make sure that they have the resources available to make a good decision.
Yeah, it's funny. I got an email just this morning from a client that they met with me in late January. We matched them with an agent within a couple of days, and within 2 weeks they were under contract and they just closed.
Awesome.
So it's lightning fast when you're in that space. And even if you're 3 months out, all of a sudden those 3 months get eaten up. So better to schedule that early and get on the horn with us so we can get you in the right spot. So yeah, definitely check that out.
Nate, I'd be remiss if we didn't ask you, big news that came out this week, settlement by the National Association of Realtors. Obviously, you as a real estate agent, if our listeners don't already know that, potentially something that's going to impact you, impact the industry at large. There has been news flying around all about this, headlines everywhere. And I think it's one of those things, it's hard to really assess like what actually is going on, what's the impact right now, and what's the potential future impact. And I know you and David just covered this on the Real Estate Investing Podcast, episode 118. We'll link to that episode in the show notes so folks can dig deeper on this topic. But give us the cliff notes of what's going on and where we're at.
Yeah, I think it's definitely worthwhile to try to get away from the media noise for a second on this, because what I'm seeing out there is all the headlines are speculating what this is going to do to the industry rather than what's actually occurred. So the very brief version is that several months and even a couple of years ago, there was a lawsuit against the National Association of Realtors by some parties that are part of a consumer advocacy group.
Mm-hmm.
And essentially what they were alleging was that there's some sort of price fixing going on, that basically sellers were told you had to offer a commission to buyer's agents. And if you didn't offer them 3% or whatever, then like you couldn't work together. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not really true. And the NAR has basically said, like, we're not admitting that we did that because we haven't been. And they're even in the settlement, they've admitted no wrongdoing at all. But essentially that's the allegation. And what they've decided to do is, rather than continue to go through expensive litigation, the NAR has decided to settle and to make some changes. So they're going to pay out about $418 million over the next 4 years to consumers. And then they're going to make some big changes in terms of how agents and the MLS can advertise
Mm-hmm.
for commissions. So they are no longer able to advertise for buyer agent commissions, and buyers are going to have to work with, and this is the big change for buyers out there, buyers are going to have to work with an agent under a contract. You're going to have a contract in place with that agent. Gone will be the days of just showing up, writing an offer with whatever agent, and then like figuring out the contract stuff later. Like that is not going to work anymore. You're going to have to be established with somebody if you want to work with an agent, because the way we get paid is going to change basically. So it's a lot of shakeup. We don't know exactly what's going to happen yet, but some of those details are starting to come forward here, and we're at the end of March already, and it's heating up.
So for those that are listening, whether it's, people that are looking right now or thinking about buying this spring or summer, how much of that is going to impact them right now, or are we still in this wait and see pattern of when some of the changes you're talking about are going to take place?
Yeah, so a lot of these changes will not go into effect until probably July and even
Mm-hmm.
beyond. That's really the deadline they've established for this. Keep in mind, again, as you and I sit here and record this, the court has not even accepted the settlement yet, right? The NAR has basically said this is what we're interested in settling on. The court still has to accept that settlement. So a lot of this is to be determined anyway. But if it all shakes out the way that they've proposed, then July is when this will start to make a difference. And again, if it goes in a bad direction, I guess for buyers, I'll put it that way. What will likely happen is that buyers are just going to have to be a little more savvy about that
Mm-hmm.
early conversation with their agent. Who is paying? How am I paying? Am I paying? Is the seller paying? Like, how are we negotiating that? And how does it affect my ability to put in offers?
Mm-hmm.
Because those are all things that are going to change in some capacity here in the next couple of months.
So again, you and David covered this on episode 118 of the YFP Real Estate Investing Podcast. Deeper dive. We'll make sure to link that in the show notes. And of course, we'll keep the community up to date as we have more information that is rolling out, and we get past some of the short-term news and the headlines and actually start to see some of the implementation of some of these things. So today's theme, Nate, is avoiding the trap of house poor, evaluating the true costs of home ownership. And as you and I were planning for this episode, we were talking about, hey, for those that are looking, this is a good opportunity to make sure that that home buying, that big rock that is a part of the financial plan, is put in the right context, right, of other goals that we're trying to achieve, so that we have the room to do those things. But also for those that already own, I talk with pharmacists on the regular that, maybe they're 3 years in, 5 years in, 10 years in, whatever it may be. And just over time, expenses have increased. Maybe they're perhaps still paying on student loans or other things, trying to save and invest more for retirement, and really feeling like in that home, they're in this situation where, hey, I don't have a whole lot of margin. I'm feeling house poor because of that. So whether someone is hey, I'm going to buy, or they currently own, I think they're going to find this episode helpful. Nate, I want to get your take on 5 things that I see on the regular that are financially impacting, especially new graduates, but I think it transcends even beyond that in a much greater way than when I graduated back in 2008, than when you graduated as well. First, student loan debt. We've talked about that at length on the show. When you look at what graduates are coming out with is in terms of an average and what that means for a monthly payment, that can be standard 10-year repayment on an average debt load. We're looking at $1,800 to $2,000 per month. Second, of course, housing costs. We're going to dig deep into that on today's episode. But, we've seen the rise in interest rates and the rise in home prices. And we see the impact of that on a monthly payment. You put those two together, right? That's a big portion of one's take home pay. We also see the third thing I'm thinking about is just car loans and interest rates on the car loans. Of
Yeah.
course, inflation is the fourth thing, although we're starting to see that, tamper down a little bit. And then five, I think one that we don't talk enough about is childcare costs.
Oh man.
And, that well, and just the costs that come from, daycare and other costs associated with children and growing a family. And so, at the end of the day, what I want to get your take on is, do pharmacists make a good income? And the answer
Mm.
is yes, objectively they do, right? If you look at the median household income in the US, pharmacists make on average $50,000 or more above that. So objectively speaking, yes. However, when you start to add these things up, right? When you start to look at student loans and housing costs and childcare costs, et cetera, that's where we often run into this situation of, hey, I make a good income, but I don't feel like I'm progressing. I don't feel like I have a whole lot of breathing room because of some of these big pieces of the puzzle that can have an impact on the financial plan. So thoughts from your seat individually living this, and then certainly working with many pharmacists that are in that position looking to buy, trying to figure out how the house budget fits into the rest of the plan.
Yeah, I mean, you're spot on, right? I live this every day just as another pharmacist also owning a home, right? You have to kind of account for all those costs, and it can feel like you get to the end of the month and every bucket has been taken up by something. And you're like, okay, how many, pennies do I have left
Mhm.
to rub together, right? It can feel like that, right? Especially if you've not set yourselves up for success. And so I definitely feel that on my own personal finances, but then I also see it with clients too, where I see this all the time, where someone will look at a neighborhood or look at an area of the country and they don't even ask the question about budget. They just say, we need 3 bedrooms, and where I'm looking, it's $800,000. And the question is not, can I afford an $800,000 house? It's just, that's what we need. And so that's what we're going to buy.
Mhm.
And I think that's really easy to get into, right? Like we love where we live, and that's not unreasonable. But rarely do we step back and evaluate, okay, am I okay with paying more to live in this particular location? Or, should I consider relocation, or should I consider sizing down and having the kids share a bedroom? Like, all those things are not questions that I often hear. It's
Yep.
usually, how can I push this? How can I lower that down payment? How can I get away from this expenses now and push those things down the road? So I think we're kind of geared toward that, and having these conversations like you and I are having is how you start to reset that metric a little bit.
Yeah, and I think one thing that I hear there, Nate, which is hard to implement, is just some of the mindset around these decisions. No judgment here whatsoever. I remember Jess and I have
Right.
talked at length about, we had an expectation coming out that we were going to buy our first home at the level which my parents took 20, 25, 30 years to get to. Like,
Right.
and that was where our mindset was. And we made several decisions and some mistakes along the way. And we probably purchased before we were ready. I'm not sure we really had enough, down in the home. We ended up paying PMI that I didn't understand how that was structured in a loan. If we had more time, I could give you the list, right? But the point being is, I think there is a mindset component here. And, sometimes we don't necessarily like the outcome or the decision when we look at the numbers. But what we're trying to do as we talk about this is really take a step back and say, hey, how does the home purchase fit as one piece of this bigger puzzle?
Yep.
And human behavior, myself included, I think you included as well, is we want to go into these silos and make financial decisions.
Yeah.
And especially when we're talking about a home purchase, it's exciting, it's emotional, right? There's a lot of things that are involved. But when we're talking about a rock that we're going to put in place that might take 25, 30, 35, 40% of our take home pay, and we're fixed in that for 30 years,
Mm-hmm.
like, hey, we've really got to do diligence so that we make sure when we look at other parts of the financial plan, right? Saving, investing for the future, pursuing other financial goals, making sure we've got breathing room, making sure we have margin to experience and to give and to do other parts of the plan. And so naturally, Nate, the next question is, well, if we're talking about trying to prevent this, what is that affordability calculation? Like, as you think about it in your own plan or in working with, other buyers as well, how do you think about what is that number? Is it a percentage of take home pay? Is it, obviously what the individual thinks it is versus what the bank thinks it is can be two very different things. Talk to us through that a little bit further.
Yeah, I think that you could Google how much house can I afford and get 72 different answers, right? With all these calculators and metrics and back of the napkin math ideas. And the answer is there is no answer. However, you hit the nail on the head a minute ago and said avoiding thinking about this decision as a silo, right?
Mm,
I think it's very easy for people to say, well, I read you could get 25% of your money toward housing, so we're just going to do that and that's our number and that's it, right? Or 30% or pick your favorite number, right? Where I think that becomes a problem is that especially like ourselves, right? When I came out of school, a ton of student loan debt, those numbers are not accurate for somebody with a ton of student
mhm,
loan debt. They're not accurate for a ton of credit card debt. They're not
yep.
accurate if you've got childcare expenses that are going to be cropping up down the road. Like all of those things can drastically affect those numbers. And so what I like to do, or what I advise my clients to, is to use something like the 50-30-20,
Mhm,
which I can cover in a second, but something that it doesn't matter which one it is, as long as you're taking all of your expenses as a bigger piece, right? So what I like about the 50-30-20 rule is that 50% of your money goes toward needs, 30% toward wants, and 20% toward net worth building. And what I like especially about that is that that big piece of the pie, that 50%, it's all your needs: food, car, medical expenses, childcare expenses, like whatever those things are.
mhm,
If you have to have them, then you have to include it in that number. And if all those numbers are already big, like what if your need is student loan payment, right? I have to pay that every single month. I can't just avoid that. So it gets factored into that and it can adjust those housing numbers down rather than just picking a flat 25% or whatever. So
yeah.
I like tools that have that much more broad look rather than trying to silo things out and saying 10% should go toward your car and
Mhm.
20% toward your house, because I don't think they work for everybody, and I think they're too broad.
Yeah, and I think to your point there, Nate, obviously everyone's situation is different, and even let's take two student loan borrowers, right? Both have $200,000 of debt. How they pursue their loan repayment strategy could drastically
Yeah,
impact the cash flow they have, right? If
absolutely.
one person says, "Hey, I want to aggressively pay these off in 5, 7 years," the other person's on a public service loan forgiveness strategy on an income-driven repayment plan where they're trying to maximize tax-free forgiveness, night and day
Yep.
of what are they actually putting out towards the student loans in terms of cash flow and what do they have available. Other things I think about in terms of where are they at in terms of savings and retirement plans and goals. So is pharmacy a second career and they're trying to play a little bit of catch up on retirement? Are they thinking early retirement and
Mhm.
maybe need to save a little bit more aggressive, right? So many factors that go into this equation, but I think using something like you're suggesting is a good place because it helps us figure out, okay, how does this payment fit into that bucket, into that 50%. And I'm guessing we often get that number. And we're like, hey, we don't like it. We don't
Right.
like what, the budget's going to support. And I think that's really where the rubber meets the road. But what's helpful about that is 99 out of 100 times when you're running your own numbers and trying to figure out what is that housing cost within that 50%, typically the bank's going to approve you for much more than that, right? And
Absolutely.
so
Yeah.
the take home point being is that they're not concerned about your 50-30-20 budget in the same way that the individual would be, correct?
Yeah, spot on, right? I never forget the first time that Kristen and I got approved for a mortgage, and the bank was like, "Well, how much house do you want to buy?" And we're like, "I don't know. How much can like what will you give us?"
Mhm.
And they just do this quick math, and it's like, "Here, you can afford 600,000." And I think our budget at the time was like 250.
Mhm.
But like they don't care, right? They're looking at the numbers very differently. They're just looking at some of the debts that you have. They don't care if you have $0 left over at the end of the month. The goal is to make sure that you can make those payments and just make those payments. And so that's
Mhm.
how they're going to set it. So yeah, you have to be your own advocate when it comes to setting that budget and not letting the bank do it for you.
Yeah, I always say, Nate, that the bank is looking out for themselves of a foreclosure risk, right? They're
Absolutely.
not looking out for, are you on track to achieve all your other financial goals, and how does this purchase? And it's not ill intent. It's just the way
Yeah,
the system's set up, and then them mitigating the risks that they need to mitigate. So,
exactly.
I think the natural follow up then, Nate, and here we are. We probably should have started here that we're not having to buy a home in 2024 where homes are at the prices they are and interest rates are where they are. So different time, right, than when we bought a home, and it's worth
Mhm.
saying. But the natural counterpoint is, well, I don't want to rent either. Rent's been going up. We know the what the data has shown in terms of rent prices going up over time, and I feel like I'm just throwing money down the drain. I'm not building equity, right? I'm
Mhm.
not building equity if I don't have a house. So, what do you say to that person who really feels like, yeah, I hear you. Like it's too much in terms of the percentage of my take home pay or within that budgeting system you just described, but I also feel like it's not like rent's cheap.
Right.
And I really feel like I'm not necessarily building any equity as we continue to rent.
Yeah, I think it's tough because some of this at some point comes down to more of an emotional decision, right? Like it's just I'm sick of renting. I'm even if financially, like you still need to stay in that boat for a little bit while longer. Just if you do the math, it's hard to make that decision, right? I mean, I absolutely get that, and I was in the same boat that you were. Like we probably bought sooner than we should have. We
Mhm.
just wanted to buy. We kind of made it work, right? But at the same time, we kept our budget very reasonable so that we could do that, right? There are ways to mitigate that risk if that's the choice you want to make, right? You you can do it if you aren't pushing everything, right? You've got to take some compromises somewhere else. So if you're looking at it, you're saying, look, we have to be in a home. I don't want to be renting anymore. Well, then you got to choose an area where the home
Mhm.
prices are affordable. I mean, just that's all there is to it, right? If you are a new practitioner in downtown San Francisco and the homes are 1.5 million and above, like it, it's just not as viable as
Mhm.
Cleveland, Ohio, where I'm from, right?
Mhm.
Or something like that. So you have to be able to take some sort of compromise if you sit there and say, look, the overall goal is to be in a home that we own. And you have to find a way to do that. It's not just, and it has to be in this market, and it has to be 6 bedrooms, and it has to be 400,000 square feet, and all this, right? It just, you
Mhm.
have to be able to adapt. And then there are other ways to get creative too, right? Think about house hacking, for example, buying a property that you can have somebody else renting out with you, then you can mitigate some of those costs.
Mhm.
Or looking for down payment assistance programs that are out there, right? There are a ton of grant programs for new graduates that help with down payment assistance. Like you can get creative, you just have to go out and do that, right? I think the old rich dad, poor dad adage, it's not, I can't afford a house, it's how can I afford a house?
Mhm.
And sometimes you have to get creative with how you do that.
Yeah, and I think that, it's the creativity is an important part of that. I think this comes back to mindset,
Mm.
as well as I think there's a script that many of us have been told. I know that I don't remember my parents saying this. It was just something I always believed, which is rent is bad, home ownership is good. And, as with most things, right, there's more than option A and B. And when we look at home ownership, depending on your situation, depending on the part of the country you're living in, depending on cash you have available for a down payment, depending
Right.
on rent rates, right? Ramit said he talks a lot about this on his podcast, living in, I think he's in New York City, where it's like, doesn't make sense. Like,
Yeah.
continuing to rent in certain markets, like, yeah, it does make sense. And you've got to figure out, to your point, other parts of the plan where sure, maybe he's not building, equity in the home, which for many people becomes one of the greatest assets they have as a part of their financial plan. But for him and for others in higher cost of living areas, you adjust and pivot, and figure out what that looks like.
It's funny you mentioned that. I was even just talking to a pharmacist 2 or 3 weeks ago, and he rents right now. He wants to buy his first house, but he wants it to be an investment property. So he's buying in a different location, continuing to rent so that he can build equity in a
Mm,
home, just as not the home that he's living in.
he's living in.
So he's still
Mhm.
getting into the real estate game, but not doing it in a way where he's making a bad decision just because of where he wants to live, right?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of ways to get creative. I wish that we could just do it all up front, but you have to kind of pick and choose when it comes to your financial plan.
I like that, Nate. Creativity, I feel like, is something we're often lacking in the financial plan, right? Because we, see a path maybe that our parents had or others had, and it's option
Yeah.
A, option B. But typically, there's more than just those two. Let's talk about some of the, I don't know about surprise, but maybe costs that often get overlooked or underestimated, especially for people that are going through this, the first time. I remember vividly. I've shared it on the show before. Jess and I bought our first home, and these numbers are laughable now saying them out loud in today's market. But 2008, 2009, this would have been post residency. We were paying rent $1,100 a month. I remember writing that check every single month for a townhome. We were looking to buy a home, and I went and did the principal and interest calculations. I don't even think I factored in taxes and insurance. Maybe I did. And I remember seeing it was going to be somewhere right around there, actually a little bit less. And like that was the end of my analytics. It was like buy, buy, buy. Um, and I think that that's very common. That you look at, hey, what's going to be my monthly payment, principal, interest? Maybe people are thinking about property taxes and insurance, but that's really the table stakes, right? That's the starting point. But talk to us about maybe those other things, either short term or long term, that tend to catch people off guard. Where sure, maybe that payment starts at 25% of take home pay, but we quickly realize if it's all in costs, it's actually a lot more.
Yeah, I mean, I think you nailed it with the the insurance and taxes, I did the exact same thing you did. I ignored them and pretended like they weren't there. And then all of a sudden the bill showed up. I'm like, what was I thinking? But you're right. There are a number of other things. I'll never forget. We moved into our very first house, and one of the reasons we moved, again, this is why home buying is emotional. But one of the reasons we moved is we wanted a space for our dog. We had
Mm,
a 1-year-old dog, wanted some space for her, wanted some space for ourselves. And so we're like, oh, let's get this big yard. Well, the very first thing we did when we moved in was like, shoot, we need a fence. And so we're like, well, we got to fence in the whole thing. And we have over like an acre. We have actually almost 2 acres. And so we wanted to fence in an acre. And all of a sudden it was like a $10,000 fence.
hmm
And it's like, man, nowhere, like that would have covered rent for a whole year at the old place, but we didn't even factor that in because
Yep.
it's just the stuff that you don't think about. So it's everything like that. I mean, I think it's the surprises, the things you don't anticipate, but it's also the regular stuff. Stuff breaks. Water heater goes down, a washing machine, a dishwasher, and all those things. You don't have a maintenance department to call anymore.
hmm
You don't have a landlord to check in with, right? You have to fix it yourself and get it taken care of.
hmm
Um, so I think those are some of the big things. The other thing that I think creeps up, and it's on top of mind right now for me because we do this thing here in Cuyahoga County, in Cleveland, Ohio, where every 3 years the county assessor will come out and they'll reassess
Yeah.
property values, and then they'll adjust your taxes as a result. I think that's,
Lovely.
yeah, right,
Lovely.
super nice. Not like that everywhere. Some places they lock you into that lower rate, but we get reassessed every 3 years. And so every 3 years, my property taxes go up in some fashion. And sometimes it's more, sometimes it's less. But it's always on the up. So even if we did that math 9, almost 10 years ago, right, and it all worked out then, things have gotten more
Right.
expensive, right? And
hmm
so it's all those little things that start to creep up over time that you don't have the backup plan for. Now,
hmm
I'll say this: rent has also been increasing, so it's not like everything's immune to that, right? You might have started renting a place for $1,000 a month or $1,100 a month,
Yep.
and now it's 15, right?
That's
So
right.
that's still there as well and has to be factored in. But with a home, it just feels like all of it is on your shoulders. And it's really just when it comes down, you have to be the one to take care of it.
Yeah, and I had the same thought. We had a reassessment, actually both on the commercial property, which was outrageous, but on the primary home, it was not as bad. But it got me thinking the same line of thinking you are, which is the tendency when we buy, and even again, no judgment, when we bought our second home here in Columbus. I remember those conversations where Jess and I were kind of looking at, okay, where do we want to be monthly payment wise, that we really feel like we're comfortable within the budget, but you're thinking about it in that moment in time,
Yep.
right? And hopefully incomes are going up to help offset this, but this is one of the challenges we're seeing, I think, in some sectors of our profession, is that they're not, or if they are, and you factor in inflation and other costs, maybe they're not to the degree that we actually think they are, even if that number is going up. And so
Mhm.
you look at things like property taxes. Homeowners insurance is something that's kicked up here in the last couple
Yeah.
of years, more significantly, and I think we're going to continue to see that. And then you highlighted well, the fence example. That's a good one. We did the same thing. We didn't have that big of a fence, but I remember it was the fence, it was repairing the deck, it was the lawn maintenance, it was because we never owned a home before, all of the lawn equipment
Yeah.
and things that you had to get for the first time. And obviously furniture, you look at the home and you're like, oh, it's fine, we like it. And then you get in and it's like, well, what about this? And what about that? And those things seem small, but those add up quickly. And it goes back to the theme of where we've been going throughout the episode, which is, hey, when you go back to your 50, 30, 20, or whatever type of budgeting system you're using, margin, breathing room,
Mhm.
knowing that up is going to be the trend,
Yep.
whether it's property taxes, homeowner insurance, upkeep, remodeling the home, a roof, hot water tank, AC, whatever, it's going to go up. And we want to have margin to be able to plan and save for those expenses.
Yeah. I mean, if you want a way to ensure that you're financially less stressed, build in that margin up front, right? It just
hmm
makes it so much easier when you have that surprise. Like if you have $1,000 water heater that needs to be replaced, but you've built in $1,000 extra in your budget every month, it's just a blip.
Yeah.
Like you don't have to have this emergency fund that you're cracking open, and like it feels so much easier to have those bumps because it's not consistent. Like that's the biggest thing with homeownership is that nothing is consistent. Every month is going to be different no
Yeah.
matter what you do, and building in some of that margin, building in that error is just a great way to de-stress that whole process.
Yeah, and I think what we're really trying to prevent is we, talk about the theme here of avoiding the trap of being house poor and really evaluating all these costs, is that we don't achieve one goal at the expense of a bunch of others. So, home ownership has a ton of value. We've talked about it on the show before. We're both big believers in home ownership. Has tremendous value, but also we don't want to be in that home and then like, hey, we're stressed about taking the trip or the vacation, or we're stressed about not being able to stay on track with retirement or other goals along the way as well.
Exactly.
Utilities, Nate, is another one I was just thinking about. Our utilities,
Oh yeah.
keep creeping up, and it feels like that's another one that you look back 2-3 years and you're like, wait a minute, what's the heating bill compared to what it was?
I have a good story about that too. I don't know if I told this on the podcast before, but early on, when we lived in our house, they the water company wanted to install this wireless water meter, and I got like one letter about it, and it was like, "Hey, call us, schedule a time for us to come out and install this wireless reader. That way, we can see remotely like what your water usage is, and like we'll come out and install it. It's free. Just let us know." And I ignored it because I was busy and everything else, and so we stopped getting water bills, and I didn't notice. And then about a year and a half in after of like that notice coming, I was like, man, our we haven't gotten a water bill in a while. So I logged in, and I cannot believe to this day, I cannot believe they didn't stop our water. We were over $1,200 behind, I think,
Oh my
because
goodness.
I hadn't been paying attention to it, and it wasn't on auto bill. And so like one of those $1,000 bumps that just showed up. So
Yeah.
I mean, again, I'm shocked they never turned off our water, but that was an example of that creep from the utility company for sure.
I'm surprised they weren't knocking on your door.
I know, right?
Yeah. So speaking of, you made me think, Nate, this is good story hour with Nate and Tim, but as we're talking about cost of home and ownership, you don't expect. I don't know if I told you this one a few years ago. So in our basement, we've never had a water softener system. So and full disclaimer, I am inept, completely inept when it comes to anything home. So just keep that in mind for anyone who's judging me as we're talking about this. So never had a water softening system. The boys, we've got 4 boys, are constantly down there throwing balls, do whatever. Well, for those that have one, there's a backwash valve that will come on periodically to flush the system. Well, they had hit the backflush valve, and I don't know, you're not down there that enough. I'm not paying attention. I don't even know what this thing is. Is it doing, whatever. So come to find out, like it had turned on and it's just been running. I don't know for how long it's been running, right? So I realized this, and then sure enough, like it might have been a week, 10 days later, I get a bill for
Oh
$4,000.
no.
And I
Oh,
called and for those that have looked at your water sewer bill, any water usage you're using, you're doubling up as
sewer as well. Yeah.
sewage. Yep. So I called the Franklin County Department of Sanitary
Mm.
Engineering, and I'm like, hey, listen, like this is what happened. You're not going to believe it. I get it. I'm an idiot. And I was like, hey, I'll write a check tomorrow if you let me pay $2,000. And they were like super gracious.
Wow. Cool.
Yeah. And
That's
so
great. Good tip.
again, right, things that come up that you're just like, I never thought that this expense might actually exist. Jess and I have a running mental log of all of the damage slash expenses that have happened as a result of the boys.
You could present that to him at graduation. Like, all right,
Yeah.
great. When you owe me this now.
Yeah. And here's the opportunity cost, right? If we
Exactly.
would have done, yeah. Um, Another thing I want to acknowledge here, Nate, is we're talking about affordability of home. We're talking about some more of those ongoing costs.
Mhm.
But also not all down payments, right, are created equal depending on the loan type. And not that we need to get into all the different types of loans. We've talked about it before on the show, but I just want to emphasize this, especially for the first time home buyers. There's a range from 0% to something more conventional on 20%. But when you're talking about a three, four, $500,000 home or more, this is a big difference in terms of house affordability. So any thoughts or wisdom you'd have there to share based on your conversation with clients and what they're expecting maybe coming in of a down payment, and then as they learn and navigate this a little bit further?
Yeah, I think the most people, if they've talked to, especially like their parents, right? I think most people assume or think that they've got to have 20% down to buy a home. The reality is there's a ton of different programs out there, and you don't need anywhere near 20% down. And you can still do that lower down payment without too much of a penalty, right? There are certainly situations where you're going to have to pay a little more in terms of either interest rate or private mortgage insurance, things like that. But there are a number of awesome programs out there that can help with down payment assistance, that can lower the down payment that's required and still have a competitive interest rate. The real trick, I guess, at this point is to one, talk to an agent that actually knows what they're
Mm-hmm.
doing, working with these types of clients, that can help with finding a good lender. Or talk to a lender that knows these products inside and out. There's a lender that I work with regularly that has like a lineup of programs that he can push people into of like, hey, you're a nurse. Awesome. You qualify for the Ohio Heroes program. Let's get you into that. Or you're a firefighter, you get, Ohio Heroes. You're a recent graduate. Great. Here, you qualify for this new grad program. It gives you $5,000. No questions asked here. So there are programs out there. There are things to help with that. And I think a lot of people just go in assuming, well, I got to find 20% down or I'm going to pay a ton of money. And that's my only choice. And there really are a lot more options out there.
Yeah. And I think to your point, that relationship with an agent, that relationship with a lender, really, really important. Options is what I hear there too, right?
Yeah.
I think it's easy to get sucked into a option without kind of looking across the board and making sure you're looking at everything. Down payment is a factor, obviously competitive interest rates. There's a lot going on with points and things right now, making sure that you're actually really looking at the full aspect of the product and that it's transparent, because sometimes it can be hard to compare apples to apples. If some offers, I've seen this a lot where people in one case are looking at a rate and it has point reductions, in other cases it doesn't, and they're not necessarily, seeing the comparison and difference there. Hey, I sprinkled this in at the beginning. I'm going to come back to it again for those that are, looking to buy now or in the future. We've partnered with you and your real estate concierge service now for many years, and love what you're doing to help out home buyers. Tell us more about what is all involved in that and where folks can go to learn more.
Yes, I mean, all the stuff we've been talking about, right? It's a lot to wrap your head around, and we're only scraping the surface of all the stuff there is to know and things to navigate. And everybody's situation is unique, right? You might be sitting there listening to this right now thinking, well, we've got this, and you haven't even talked about that. Like, what do I do, right? And so having somebody on your team, I think, is really important, and that's why we created the concierge service to begin with, is to have that sort of team mentality around it, and give you somebody in your corner that has experience to help you navigate whatever it is. So the way the program works is that you basically go to my website. We mentioned that before. And you can sign up for a free call with me, do a 30-minute jumpstart planning call where we can ask and answer a lot of those questions that you have, get you connected with a fantastic agent, get you connected with a great lender if you need it, whatever we need to do to get you off and running in the right direction, right? And that might be that you're ready to buy now and you're like, hey, we have been popping on Zillow, help us out. Or it might be that you're 9 months down the road and you're just starting to plan things out. Both of those are great times to connect with us. So it's a completely free service. We don't charge anything for that. We just, again, try to offer a way to help people navigate this very complicated process with somebody that's experienced it and lived and breathed it for several years now.
Great stuff, Nate. 2 ways you can get there. You can go directly to realestaterph.com. We'll link to that in the show notes. You can also go to yourfinancialpharmacist.com. You'll see an option for home buying at the top, and then you can click on find an agent. It'll get you that same exact place, and then you can book a call with Nate to continue that discussion. Nate, great stuff as always. Look forward to having you back on the show throughout the year. I know we're going to do some webinar stuff as well. So to our community, make sure you be on the lookout for information we're going to have forthcoming as it relates to some home buying materials, webinars, and future episodes as well. Thanks, Nate.
Thanks, Tim.
Nate and I have covered a ton of information in this podcast. So imagine working with Nate one-on-one through your home buying journey and having his support to give you much needed peace of mind. We know many pharmacists want to feel confident about big financial decisions, including a home purchase. So if you have fears of being house poor or concerns about the impact a home purchase might have on your other financial goals, Nate and his home buying concierge service can help, all at no cost to you. You can visit realestaterph.com or click on the link in the show notes to schedule your free 30-minute jumpstart planning session with Nate. As we conclude this week's podcast, an important reminder that the content on this show is provided to you for informational purposes only and is not intended to provide and should not be relied on for investment or any other advice. Information in the podcast and corresponding materials should not be construed as a solicitation or offer to buy or sell any investment or related financial products. We urge listeners to consult with a financial advisor with respect to any investment. Furthermore, the information contained in our archived newsletters, blog posts, and podcasts is not updated and may not be accurate at the time you listen to it on the podcast. Opinions and analyses expressed herein are solely those of your financial pharmacist unless otherwise noted and constitute judgments as of the dates published. Such information may contain forward-looking statements which are not intended to be guarantees of future events. Actual results could differ materially from those anticipated in the forward-looking statements. For more information, please visit yourfinancialpharmacist.com/disclaimer. Thank you again for your support of the Your Financial Pharmacist podcast. Have a great rest of your week.